Hello, hello. So we're starting the class, and I just want to remind you that you are free to participate, and for every time that you participate, I take into account for the points that you earned extra, and everything counts in this class. So it's better for you to participate. Okay, so today we're gonna start with unit number 3. We finished talking about unit 2, which was about interviews and interviewing a person, interviewing a friend, a professor, a job interview, and so on. So we talk a lot about interviews. So now we are going to start talking about business pitches. And so you're going to ask yourself what that means. And this unit is all about that. We're going to talk about um, what is important in terms of business and speaking. So, in terms of that, we're going to phrase everything about critical thinking and why critical thinking is important for business also. And well, you're going to discover the importance of it. And hopefully, you're going to start using critical thinking because this is not just for English, although it's the language that it uses is the most, I think, but it's something that is not just for just one language. It's something that is it's more of a like a cultural thing, and it happens, and so it also exists in Spanish. But when you study Spanish, they don't actually tell you about critical thinking. But let me tell you that it is very, very important for any language and for communications specifically to do critical thinking. And of course, for business, it will be important. Okay. So we're about to start unit 3 for this conversation seminar. So let's go. In order to understand the business pitches and the information that we're going to talk about in this unit, first of all, we need to talk about critical thinking and try to understand what that means. Then we're going to go and study the fallacies. And with those, in this class, in today's class, we're going to talk about the straw man fallacy, which is about critical thinking, of course. And it's just one example of those fallacies, which are a lot of different fallacies that you can find in the language. And part of your homework will be about investigating or doing some research and giving examples of another 3 different fallacies. But you are going to have information to read a little more about it, of course. And well, it's up to you to learn more if you want to learn more. And of course, then we're going to go and see why is it important for an industrial engineer, as you are, to learn about this. And most definitely because it is important for any type of business. So we're going to learn about that. And this is how the class for today is going to go. Let's see. And like I said, we're going to start talking about critical thinking and see what it means first. And of course, we're going to go and see examples, and we're going to go after this and see what the strawman fallacy is. But before we can understand the strawman fallacy, we're going to understand what a fallacy means because we need to understand everything every step of the way. So let's see what critical thinking means. And so, as you can see, I included a few definitions of it. Critical thinking is an ability to think clearly and rationally. So mainly it refers about that. You are thinking clearly and rationally, understanding the logical connection between ideas. So it's not just about thinking or receiving a thought or something that somebody else is saying and you are just receiving what the other person is saying and understanding it that way. No, it's not about that. It's about being critical, actually, being critical when you think. And that's why I chose this picture, because that's the famous thinker. It's a famous portrait of a person thinking on it. So critical thinking might be described as the ability to engage in reflective and independent thinking. So, in essence, critical thinking requires you to use your ability to reason. It's about being an active learner rather than a passive recipient of information. So, it's about everything that you get of information. It doesn't matter if it's verbally or written communication. It's about trying to analyze everything and try to make some critics or be a critique on the information that you receive. That's why it's called being an active learning. Critical thinkers rigorously question ideas and assumptions rather than accepting them at face value. So it's about questioning. They will always seek to determine whether the ideas, arguments, and findings represent the entire picture and are open to finding that they do not. So it's always about being open to find differences about what is written or about what is being said to you. And you're going to find out that this is like very, very interesting when we go and talk about politics. When we start talking about the fallacies, you're going to understand that a little more. Because, yeah, we're supposed to go ahead and use our critical thinking, not just accepting everything that the other person tells us. So, critical thinkers will identify, analyze, and solve problems systematically rather than by intuition or instinct, because it's about analyzing, not just because, I feel it. I feel that it is like this. No, it's not about using your gut or your stomach to decide something. It's about using your minds to analyze, to distort everything and trying to get a reason for everything. So it's about questioning what is being said to you. Therefore, I used a different definition, a small way to say it over there in the pink box down there. Critical thinking is a way of thinking about particular things at a particular time. It is not the accumulation of facts and knowledge of something that you can learn once and then use it in that form forever. No. Such as the 9 times table you learn and use it in school. Like 2 times 2, oh, that's 4. 9 times 9, oh, that's 81. That's something that you learn and you can't really analyze. You already know that the those times tables are like, oh, that's if I multiply 9 times 9, so it's about adding 9 times. So there's not really a critical thinking on it. So it's like something just logical and that's it. But like it said over here, critical thinking is referred to a particular thing at a particular time, separated from the rest. Okay? So like it's like we said before, it's about reflecting and independent thinking. Okay, so we'll go. That's the main definition of it. But if you want to be a critical thinker, then there are some skills that you need to have. The skills that everybody, all the people need in order to be able to think critically are varied and include observation, analysis, interpretation, reflection, evaluation, inference, explanation, problem solving, and of course, decision making. So this should be something related to you. So those are skills that you're supposed to have in order to question the idea, to critically discuss something. Specifically, we need to be able to think about a topic or issue in an objective and critical way. Another thing is about identify the different arguments there are in relation to a particular issue. Evaluate a point of view to determine how strong or valid it is. Recognize any weaknesses or negative points that there are in the evidence or argument. Also, notice what implications there might be behind a statement or argument. And provide structured reasoning and support for an argument that we wish to make. So in general, as a resume, we should be able to have these skills to reflect, to identify, to notice, to evaluate. So in general, it's about analyzing and evaluating, but of course, providing the reasoning. Yes, we use our mind, we think, and we evaluate, and we give a response. That's about critical thinking. And like I said at the beginning, this is a common use in English. It's been discussed for the last 100 years at least. And usually it's been taught in a university degree, as you are right now. So it's about discussing the ideas and it's about thinking in that way. And it's part, like I said, it's part of the language because it's about communicating. And it's also about understanding and being able to refute. If you have to reject something, you need to be ready for that. So that's why to be able to critically think, it's very important. And again, what I'm saying is referred to the language. So this is not like some basic common English. No, you're required to know a little more about the language, and then we can speak about this critical thinking. And that's why we are covering these classes during the English Conversation Seminar 2 and not during the one, because you have to go through a process to be able to understand this a little bit better. All right. So in terms of that, if we're thinking about critical thinking, then we're thinking about analyzing, evaluating, and responding, and so on. Therefore, there are certain ways of communicating that are called fallacies. And as you can see from the gift picture that is moving over here, you can see that there is two people arguing and there is one person saying you can't understand it. And it seems to be a person who has beaten the little kid over there. And then the other person, the lady, is saying, hey, stop. So basically, it's like something is happening, but the two people, the two adults over there, they too have an argument and they have different points of view. And depending on how you defend your point of view, it might become a fallacy. So you're not understanding it right now. It's kind of confusing, and that's why we're going to define what a fallacy is. And let me just rephrase it again. This is about critical thinking. It is a way to understand critical thinking, actually. So fallacies and critical thinking, and in terms of this, critical thinking, disposition, and informal reasoning fallacies are two essential components of critical thinking. So talking about fallacies and communicating in terms of fallacies, like I said, is a way of critical thinking. All right. So I put an example over here. I know that still it's been hard for you to understand, but please be patient and keep following the information, and you are going to be able to understand this once we go through the examples with one of the fallacies that are very common, and it's about the strawman fallacy. So just bear with me a little bit more, okay? So this example says over here, there's two people on this example. One who seems to be the employer of the other one. And so that's the person speaking for most of the part. And he says, I collected optimistic data, put it in the context of bad analogies, season it with salience bias, added herd instinct, a pinch of confirmation bias, and here's your strategy. Just add leadership. And then the other person says, why do I always get the hard part? If you didn't understand it, probably it's because you need a little more knowledge about vocabulary, but also because I'm going to explain it a little more. Bias, being biased, or it's about something being biased, and like in this case, bias is used for information. So being biased, it's kind of, if I may use something like a synonym, it's kind of like a deviation. So this is a common term in statistics, because when you are, for example, when you have a graph in statistics, and then you're analyzing this data, for example, let me do it more clearly. When you have data in statistics, and if you are trying to analyze something like this, for example, you have all of those points of data that are graphed, and then you analyze them in a very biased way. Like, for example, you may say that this information follows a linear regression, when clearly you can actually see that that's not linear. So therefore, we can say that this information is being biased because it's deviated from the actual regression, which probably in the data that I just draw, this information was probably like this, following something that it was more like a parabolic sort of way. So yes, that's about being biased. So this person is talking about, I added information, I did some makeup on the information, and everything is good, so go for it. And so the other person is like, okay, I go for it. He didn't analyze anything. He didn't do any critical thinking. He was like, oh, I have to do the leadership for what? This guy used all of his roles to do even the leadership on it. He took the decisions on it. So this other guy is like doing nothing and accepting the information. He's accepting everything over here. So that's why critical thinking is very, very important everywhere. You can find another very good example to explain this, and why we are using this example is because when you study critical thinking, you're going to see that most of the information, the info, is wrong, or there are errors or mistakes. So that's when we talk about fallacies. A fallacy refers to something that is wrong, or an error, or a mistake. But in between the language. When somebody wants, or when someone has a statement and wants you to believe in that statement, even though it might be wrong. But if they are better in critical thinking than you are, they have win the argument even before it even started. What I just said was, if the other person is better in critical thinking than you are, then any argument, even if it's a wrong argument, even if it's a lie or something wrong, they are winning against you. So to be able to defend any argument, any discussion, and I may say that everything in communication, everything when you are communicating, so everything in communication, you need to do critical thinking. And like I said, we are going to start talking about the fallacies, because fallacies are what are related to lies or wrongdoing or wrong saying or error in the language or errors in communication. And maybe not errors. Some people use fallacies to convince other people. And it might not be the truth when they are speaking, but because they are very good at speaking and at critical thinking and at defending their points of views, they get on with their fallacies. But that shouldn't happen. So let's try to understand. We're going to go with the examples, and well, we're going to talk about what a fallacy is first. So what is a fallacy then? We've been talking about critical thinking and that a fallacy might be a mistake, an error, a lie. So let's see a way to define a fallacy. Fallacies are defects that weaken argument. So that's why you need to be very good at making your own arguments. If you don't have critical thinking, the other person who is arguing with you, arguing or discussing with you, they may win the argument. So in terms of winning something, in terms of winning an argument, you need to be very good at critical thinking in order to refute the fallacies. So yes, this is a little more deeply about the language, but let me tell you, it's very interesting. Once you keep on reading about this after this class and you do your homework, you're going to enjoy this type of class. And I'm very hopeful about that. Okay, so first, fallacious arguments are very, very common and can be quite persuasive, at least to the casual reader or listener. So that's the thing. I keep telling you, if you are just a casual reader or you don't read at all, that means that you don't know much about language, any language. That could be even Spanish. So it doesn't have to be just English. But if you only read the least minimum, for example, for what you're studying, if you only read for whatever you're studying, you are not a persuasive person because you need more information. You need more about the language. And like I say, any language. So fallacious arguments are very, very common and can be quite persuasive, at least to the casual reader or listener. You can find dozens of examples of fallacious reasoning in newspapers, advertisements, and other sources, which may not be true, but that requires critical thinking. Second, it is sometimes hard to evaluate whether an argument is fallacious. Yeah, that's another thing. You need to reason a lot to try to understand when an argument is fallacious. But you can get there once you read more, once you understand more about the fallacies, and then you get to be a strategic person, kind of, An argument might be very weak, somewhat weak, or somewhat strong, or very strong. An argument that has several stages or parts might have some strong sections and some weak ones. So in terms of an argument, if it is fallacious, it might get true, but it might not be true. Maybe you didn't understand what I said, but yeah. A fallacy, it might be a defect on the language, but exists. And exists also because of critical thinking. And since there is people in the world who really use fallacies, you need to learn more about any language, and you need to understand more about the language, in this case about English, to be able to understand what the other person is telling you. And like I said before, the basic for this is critical thinking. The second part, after thinking about the basics, is about knowing that there exist fallacies and try to understand the fallacies. And once you understand the fallacies, you will be able to understand even better to every person when they are communicating with you. And if they do have arguments, you will be able to understand them much, much better. And of course, to refute any argument, to reject the arguments, but with facts, with the truth, and not with something that is fallacious, that might be a lie, okay? Or it might be something wrong. So in other words, in order to understand what a fallacy is, one must understand what an argument is. We've been talking about an argument. So very briefly, to say what an argument is an argument consists of one or more premises and one conclusion. So let's keep on reading. A premise is a statement, a sentence that is either true or false, that is offered to support of the claim being made, which is the conclusion, which is also a sentence that is either true or false. Therefore, that's why when we talk about arguments, then we talk about fallacies. A fallacy is very general, an error in reasoning, a mistake when you are reasoning. So that's why in the languages and in this type of language, in English, there are fallacies, different type of fallacies. For instance, there is a document that I'm going to add to the platform where you are going to have 42 different fallacies, different type of fallacies. At least there is more than 40 different types of fallacies. So that's about for you to read and to be able to get to know more about the language and to know more about communication. It is important for you to get more knowledge, but that's up to you. You decide if you want to learn more or not. So to be more specific, a fallacy is an argument in which the premises given for the conclusion do not provide the needed degree or support. So I skipped this part. This differs from a factual error, which is simply being wrong about the facts. So this is not just about that. So it's about analyzing. There are, or we could say that there exist two different types of fallacies. One might be the deductive fallacy, and the other one might be an inductive fallacy. A deductive fallacy is a deductive argument that is invalid. It is such that it could have all the premises and still have a false conclusion. So that everything is false. But an inductive fallacy is less formal than the other one, the deductive. They are simply arguments which appear to be inductive arguments, but the premises do not provide enough support for the conclusion. In such cases, even if the premises were true, the conclusion would not be more likely to be true. So both of them, or of course, since we're talking about fallacies, they are taking us to an error in reasoning. That's what we're talking about right now. So now we're going to see a few examples about these deductive and inductive fallacies and factual error. For example, a deductive argument, premise 1, premise 2, in conclusion. Premise 1, if Bill is a cat, then Bill is a mammal. Premise 2, Bill is a cat. In conclusion, Bill is a mammal. Another example, including inductive argument. Premise 1, most American cats are domestic house cats. Premise number 2, Bill is an American cat. Conclusion, Bill is domestic house cat. So you already know that this might be a false argument because you only know that Bill is a cat. You don't know that he is a house cat or a domestic house cat. So that's the thing. There is not enough argument to have a good conclusion. And therefore, these conclusions might end up being some mistakes, some errors in the argument. And then an example of the factual error, for example, Columbus is the capital of the United States. Why do you know, or how do you know that this is a factual error? Factual, because of facts. Because it's not called Columbus, it's called Washington District of Columbus, which is often abbreviated as Washington, D.C. So this is a total factual error because it's not even the same place. Two more examples about deductive and inductive fallacies. For example, premise 1, if Portland is the capital of Maine, then it is in Maine. Premise number 2, Portland is in Maine. Conclusion, Portland is the capital of Maine. Let's analyze it. Portland is in Maine, but Augusta is the capital. Portland is the largest city in Maine, though. Therefore, these arguments are wrong. But how do you know that they were wrong? Because you need to know more information. How do you know more information to be able to understand all of the arguments? Understand them. You need to educate yourself. You need to read. This is not information that just comes on the social networks or just reading through something that another friend published. This is information that is common general knowledge that you need to know about any language. So you need to read any topic about any topic. You need to know about history. You need to know about culture. And history, not just about your country, this is about global history. You should read about global culture. You should be investigating, and that's actually, guys, that's actually the only way to learn more about a language. Because not all the information comes in a book, in an English book. Not all of the information comes in a class of English. You need to do your research, investigate, read, and then you're going to get the knowledge for your argument, to be ready to discuss something. And in those arguments, you're going to have your, what it is expected for you to have, which is critical thinking. And this is not just for just being a student. This is for your goal of going to any type of business, going to the workforce. Even if it is your business or if you're going to be an employee of someone else, it is important for you. And that's the way that we're going to close this class, when we discuss about critical thinking and the importance in business. And also about, we talk about the skills that you need to have to be a critical thinker, but then those you need to apply them to be able to succeed in business. And since you are about to finish school as to be an engineer, you should be able to be a critical thinker. And in terms of a language, you should be able to understand any type of argument and to be able to understand the fallacies and to be able to refute them, to reject them. So an example of inductive, not deductive. I finished with the deductive, with inductive fallacy. Premise number one, having just arrived in Ohio, I saw a white squirrel. Conclusion, all Ohio squirrels are white. What? Of course not. There are several different species. But how do you know that there are several different species about squirrels? Because that's general knowledge. Everybody knows about that. While there are many, many squirrels in Ohio, the white ones are very rare. Take a look at that one. Yeah, it's actually like, actually I've lived in places where you can see lots of squirrels, and that's very natural whenever you're walking by some places. And I've never seen a white one, actually. And I've also visited this state, Ohio, and no, I didn't see a white squirrel. So yes, it's true what it says in here, that they're actually very rare. So like I said, and this is general knowledge about animals. Ardillas, if you don't know what we're talking about. Okay. So with that said, we talk about a fallacy and critical thinking. And we mentioned that critical thinking will ask you to evaluate, to analyze, to check everything that you are listening or reading, whatever it is in communication. But also, part of it, we are including the fallacies. And we describe a fallacy being an argument that is usually wrong, that there is an error on the argument. Therefore, we're going to talk about one example of fallacies. Like I said, this is only one example, the one that we're covering that we're going to cover in this class. But your homework will be about reading, and you're actually going to watch a few videos about this. And then you're going to look for some examples, and that's what you're going to be writing for your homework about the Stroman fallacy. All right. So let's see what it is. A strawman, actually, if you were to translate a strawman, it's not a straight translation like straw, because if you translate just like that, you will say el hombre de popote, which is not. A strawman is more like el de paja, el espantapájaro. That's why not everything goes with a straight translation. It's not the same, but how are we using a strawman to talk about a fallacy? I don't know, just the ones with critical thinking and critical writing, they decided to give this name to this type of fallacy. So we're going to study it. And it's called like that, strawman fallacy. All right. So the definition for this fallacy is as follows. One way of making our own arguments stronger is to anticipate and respond in advance to the arguments that the opponent might make. The arguer sets up a wimpy version of the opponent's position and tries to score point by knocking it down. And then you're gonna, what? What are you talking about? Okay, just be patient. Let's read it again. The definition of a strawman fallacy. One way of making our own arguments stronger is to anticipate and respond in advance to the arguments that an opponent might make. The arguer sets up a wimpy version of the opponent's position and tries to score point by knocking it down, which means there are going to be two arguments, at least, two different ways of thinking between the two arguments. Then the one of the arguments is going to try to be very strong and try to knock down the other one and try to win. But that doesn't mean that the two arguments are an error or a lie. So let's see, we're going to go through a few examples and we're going to try to understand by the examples what the strawman fallacy means. Okay? So let's see. There is one, the first example. You don't care about my happiness. This is about a teenager. Let's see about this. Teenagers are experts at strawman arguments. As they learn the ins and outs of adult conversation, teenagers experiment with controlling the direction of a discussion. That happens because they think that everything that they are thinking is correct, no matter what. Los adolescentes, they think that way. So there's the example for the strawman fallacy. Let's see. There is a parent and a teenager. The parent says, your curfew is at 10 p.m. tonight. 10 p.m., your curfew. Then the teenager responds, but the party doesn't even start until 9. There is an argument going on right now. The parent answers, it's a school night, so you need to be home by 10. That's not going to end that well. The teenager responds with an argument. You just want me to be unpopular. You don't care about my happiness. Uh-oh. So, what's the fallacy? What's happening here? The teenagers, let's go again. The teenagers are experts in strawman arguments because they're sort of like understanding what the adult life is, and they try to be like an adult when they are not. And so their behavior will be responding and making arguments that are strawman fallacies. Anything that gets an adult off of the main discussion will be considered a win for the typical teenager. If the parent's next comment is defensive, such as, I do care about your happiness, the teenager has successfully turned the conversation away from the undesirable curfew time. With any luck and some rhetorical skill, they may be able to guilt their parent into an even longer curfew. So that happens a lot. If the parent didn't notice this, and if that type of parent doesn't know about critical thinking and about the strawman fallacies, yes, we could have that situation happening here. The parent answering back with something like, oh, I do care about your happiness. Then we are in trouble because then the curfew is going to be extended. And instead of going back home by 10 p.m., then this teenager may end up being back home by 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and we already know that that's not correct for teenagers because there are a lot of difficulties in the world. There is a lot of danger. And of course, if there is a school night, like it's saying here, school night starts very early. The next day means that the next day, this teenager has to go to classes, has to go to school. That's a school night in between the week. So is it important to know about the strawman fallacies? Yes, of course. To be a better communicator, to be a better critical thinker, we need to understand the fallacies in the language. So let's see a different example and keep learning about the strawman fallacies. I have a few more examples. Oh, here I added another part of the definition of it after the first example, and then we're going to have more examples. The strawman fallacy is committed when a person simply ignores a person's actual position and substitutes a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of that position. This sort of reasoning has the following pattern. Person A has a position X, person B has a position Y, which is distorted from the version of X. Person B attacks position Y, and therefore X is false, incorrect, or flawed. But that's because this person usually knows very well on how to use a strawman fallacy. That's when it happens. Then it doesn't matter about the argument of number one because, or the argument of person A, if that person doesn't know very well about this fallacy, the importance of this fallacy, or a way of critical thinking, or what is also called rhetorical, which is about critical thinking. This sort of reasoning is fallacious because attacking a distorted version of a position simply does not constitute an attack on the position itself. One might as well expect an attack on a poor drawing of a person to hurt that person. So, yes, this is another part of the definition. Let's see and try to understand a little more, like I said, with the examples. Medicare for all, that's another example. And this is something that politicians talk a little bit too much. Medicare is about having medical care. Medical care. Servicio médico. Okay, for everyone. So politics is a popular place to find logical fallacies. And especially when you see political debate. Political debate. Most of what they discuss are fallacies because they are expert in speaking, in making arguments that not necessarily are truth. Yes, that's true. Particularly strawman arguments. Consider the controversial issue of a universal healthcare known on some platforms as Medicare for all. This is the example. So Medicare for all. Politician A, providing Medicare for all citizens will be costly and a danger to the free market. Then politician B says, you don't care if people die from not having healthcare. So this person is making a fallacy. He's implying that person A doesn't care about people. But politician A never said that he didn't care about people. He even mentioned that he's going to take care about economics and about the free market, which is about free medical service. but also considering the private service. So he was implying something more, but there comes this other person, the second, the politician B, and he implies something else. And if this person, if the number one or A doesn't know very well about fallacies and about critical thinking, it's very hard to respond with a good argument. So that's why these people, but everyone who is listening to this type of arguments, they need to do very well in their thinking, analyze what is going on, and understand the reality behind the words. Politician A's position is about the impact of universal healthcare on the free market, as it will endanger the private insurance industry. Politician B has bypassed the argument and made it about not caring if people die. Now, politician A has to defend their sense of humanity rather than their fiscal responsibility. So the debate originally, this type of debate was about costly and yes, the free market. But since these politicians switched the topic, because he was very smart and intelligent about this, then now they're not talking anymore about economics. Now they have to talk about humanity, the sense of humanity and considering people's lives. But now, because this argument was allowed in the debate, so it happens, and that's true. And so it has the tendency, a fallacy like the Strawman fallacy in communication, it has the tendency to switch from the truth or to switch, to move from the original argument. So that's why in this case, if we have two different people, the person number one, it has to be very smart to answer back and keep the original argument. Because if it doesn't, if that person doesn't do that well, then he lost the argument for sure. That happens. Another example is the theory of evolution. No one knows where we really come from. Nobody knows. It's actually a theory. And yet the theory of evolution is a hotbed of controversy. And where there's controversy, there is room for fallacy. For example, we have two people again. Person A, evolution is one possible explanation for the origins of life. Then let's see about person B, what it says. Person B, don't ignore the scientific evidence of evolution. It proves that men shared a common ancestor with apes, and that the Earth is over 4 billion years old. But still, it's a theory. If you do the critical thinking here, you know that it is a theory, and yes, that it might have a lot of scientific evidence, but still, it's not a law. Can you spot the strawman? Person A didn't say that the theory of evolution is certainly untrue. It didn't say that. It mentioned a possibility. However, that's the straw man that person B is arguing against. Person B has steered the conversation. He moved the conversation to a different place. It steered away the conversation from its original point, evolution being a theory, not a certainty, and now person A will likely become defensive. Yes, it goes away. But because there are two people arguing, and the two of them should be very good in understanding what, in this case, the strawman fallacy is, to be able to keep arguing back and trying to go back to the original topic. That's the whole point of it. Keep the original point, not going away. Another example here, choosing a pet. And this is about choosing a cat or a dog. Making a decision is popular. Is a popular time for strawman arguments to arise. For example, imagine a husband and a wife. They're trying to decide whether they should adopt a dog or a cat. The wife says, I'd rather have a dog than a cat. And the husband says, why do you hate cats? Did you get the strawman fallacy there? Did you get it? Did you get it? She didn't mention that she hates cats. She says that she might prefer a dog over a cat, but she is actually implying that she could even get a cat. She's just saying that she might prefer a dog from a cat. And he's saying, why do you hate cats? If she answered back with saying that she doesn't hate cats, he's winning the argument about getting a cat. Because he's moving with the strawman fallacy. He's steering the wheel. He's moving from the main idea of deciding one or the other because he's deciding to get the cat. The wife never said that she hates cats, only that she preferred dogs. The husband either assumed or pretended that her argument was against cats instead of for dogs. Now, the wife must argue that she doesn't hate cats, which completely changes the course of the discussion. This example of a strawman argument is related to slippery slope reasoning, which is other part of critical thinking. Very interesting, isn't it? Very, very interesting. Fallacies. So yeah, we're about to close up with the topic of the strawman argument. Strawman arguments prevent people from listening and considering each other viewpoints or points of view. Now that you've seen the ways of statements can be distorted or taken out of context, here are some ways to counter these arguments and steer the conversation back on course. So, how do you defend yourself? How do you go back to the original argument? First of all, point out why you believe the objection is a strawman argument. Yes, you can tell the other person, hey, you're making a strawman argument. And you have to reason about that. Challenge your opponent to justify their distorted view and explain how it is identical or equivalent to your original assertion. Your opponent must then defend their view. So now you're trying to go back to the original point. The other part it will be about ignoring the argument. Ignore the strawman argument entirely and simply continue elaborating on your original point. That will move the discussion back to the point that you're trying to make. So going back to the original one. You see, pay attention to it. And another option will be use a stillman rhetorical response. What's a stillman rhetorical response? Let's see. To strengthen your opponent's strawman. Basically, when you hear a strawman argument in response to your point, rephrase their argument in the most positive and charitable way possible. Take it back, take their arguments that are against yours, against your own, and move them back to your point of view. But for that, you need experience in language. And like I said since the beginning, you need more critical thinking. Use more your brain. Ask for the example before. The wife can say, I think I made a mistake. It should be said over there. Ask for the example. Using the example before. The wife can say, you think that I only want a dog because I don't like cats. The husband agrees. Then the wife can spend time explaining why she prefers dogs to cats. So she goes back to the preferable of dogs, but without saying that she doesn't like cats, and likely convincing her husband that a dog is the better choice. So who will be the winner in arguing when there is a strawman fallacy present? The person who knows about how to defend and the person who can use these things like pointing out why you believe the objection is a strawman argument, ignoring the strawman argument entirely, or use a what is called a steelman, or just call a rhetorical response. Moving back to the original point. Calmly countering the strawman fallacy allows you to regain control of the topic. This will stop the conversation veering off on a tangent and moving farther and farther away from the original point being made. So it is very important that you understand the different types of fallacies. This is just one. Let me remind you, this is just one type of fallacy. But I'm giving you a lecture, a reading, an article that has at least 42 different types of fallacies, and they may be more on any language. So this is just one example. Like I said, it's about reading, it's about trying to understand, to be able to communicate better. In this case, in English, in the English language, because we're talking about English here. Therefore, since those are important, and like I said, we're going to cover more through the unit, and part of it will be your weekly work, which is about homework. Now we're just going to close down the class talking about the importance for business, the importance for critical thinking, creative thinking, it becomes that, and why any business or any company should make a point to having their employees knowing or having this skill of critical thinking. So let's see. The role of critical thinking in business is as following. When applying critical thinking in business, a leader, you know that you already know what leaders are, a leader must use logic to identify, understand, analyze, and solve problems. This requires patience and practice. The successful application of critical thinking often results in more efficient work process. Yes, that's the reality. You're looking for this, more efficient work process. That's what every company looks for in their people, that they work efficiently. So if they're able to identify, understand, analyze, and solve problems, they work efficiently. The following three examples help answer why critical thinking is important in business. Let's see the three examples. Improve communication strategies. Communicating with different types of people requires defining the needs of the target audience, which demands critical thinking. For example, if a company is being bowed out by a competitor, pardon me, the CEO must consider how this will impact everyone, from low-level employees to investors, and determine what messages to convey to each party. Acting quickly is essential, as he or she should be the first to give the employees the news to maintain their trust. Another why is important in business, to support smooth operations. Maintaining daily operations in an ever-changing environment requires constant critical thinking. Constant. For example, if the power goes out at a restaurant, and there is no emergency generator, the manager must decide not only what to do with the customers and staff, but also whether and how to salvage refrigerated food. The quicker the manager acts, the more likely he or she is to make the best of an unfortunate situation. So again, it's about identifying, understand, analyzing, solving problems, making decisions, make decisions. Let's see the third one. Streamline product development. This is probably more related to industry. A product development role requires multiple decisions to ensure efficacy, marketability, and safety. So this is a lot of related to you as industrial engineers. For instance, if a company is marketing a new kitchen gadget, designing it a certain way will make it look more appealing, but the design could also make it more difficult to use. Should the company prioritize function or fashion? The sooner it reaches a decision, the sooner production can begin. So again, critical thinking. It needs to identify, understand, analyze, solve the problem. Probably the solution is in between. You sacrifice some of the design and you sacrifice a little bit of the function, which you shouldn't sacrifice on the function. You could probably think a little more about the way that the gadget or the product can look and try to innovate and look for something different. In each of these examples, critical thinking directly impacts efficiency in the workplace. Like I said, critical thinking. And so you should be asking yourself, how is that related to fallacy? Again, because you need to analyze every argument, everything that happens through communication. You shouldn't just accept everything that somebody else tells you. You should not. You should be able to argue about everything, to discuss, to question what other people is telling you. But in order to be able to question everything and to analyze, you need to know more about any language and about culture and about history and about everything. But that's part of you and part of being an engineer. And that's why I decided to include this type of topics in this class. Because to be a good engineer, you need to be a critical thinker. And you need to know more about the language. And you need to know more about fallacy. And we're just covering this in one unit in this class. But hopefully, this will help you develop more skills about communication. The demand for critical thinking in business is then critical thinking is considered a soft skill. I don't know if you remember las habilidades blandas when we talk about this in your other class about leadership, and one of these soft skills should be critical thinking. If you remember the list that we covered, it's not as common for us in Spanish, but it is very good, a very, very good skill. Pensamiento crítico. La habilidad de pensamiento crítico that everybody should have. Like hard skills such as proficiency in foreign language, interpersonal skills, characterized as soft, are hard to quantify. Communication, leadership, and teamwork are examples of soft skills. They might not be measurable with the test of numbers, but they are recognizable in how people interact with others. While hard skills, as evidenced in grades, certificates, or demonstrate competencies such as typing speed, such as knowing about a software, such as knowing how to use a tool, as part of what recruiters look at, they are only part of the picture, only part. So you also need soft skills. We already discussed that in a different class. The job market is increasingly acknowledging the importance of soft skills. In fact, according to one statistic in 2016, Pay Scale and Future Workplace joint report, about 60% of hiring managers believe recent graduates lack problem solving and critical thinking skills. Mhm. And you know what? Yes, that's true. I just had this conversation with when last week for a recent graduate when someone was getting his title for an industrial engineer. We were talking, the professors, we were discussing with the engineer from the company. And he is also a graduate from our same university, as well as you are going to be in less than a year when you graduate. But now that he has more experience, he can see this also. And he's from a different generation, from the first generation from our university. So he's having problem with recent graduates. In that company, they are hiring recent graduates, but this is something that he mentioned very clearly. They lack problem solving and critical thinking skills. They can't reason it. But why is that? This is not about something that you can just learn in school and that's that easy. No, it requires you to concentrate, to analyze, to have a mixture of the other skills, and to want to know more about communication. It requires you to make decisions, and it requires you to study, because this is about reading, about having some habits in terms of research, reading, communicating. So I'm just letting you know with this statistic that it's truth, and it depends on you what you're gonna do or not. Given that critical thinking is important in business, it's very important. I want to make that clear. Professionals must make an effort. You must make an effort to develop this soft skill. You guys, you need to pay more attention about critical thinking. And that's why I chose to include this in this class. Yeah, you should be happy about it because we're speaking about it. Thank you. Critical thinking, just like problem solving, can be an acquired skill, given the right amount of dedication to practicing and mastering it. Real world simulations or settings can provide the background for professionals to develop the skill. What's more, to have an impact on business, critical thinking must be complemented by clear and confident communication, another soft skill. Even professionals with business say they likely won't succeed if they can't communicate their insights to senior leaders, managers, or co-workers. Mhm. Yes. Okay, so we've been talking about critical thinking, about how this is important, about how you need to use critical thinking in your lives, especially since you are about to be considered a professionals in just a few months from now. So this is not just for English, this is also for acquiring the skill of critical thinking. And but of course, for this class is about discussing, and critical thinking will help us discuss this and any topic. It will help us arguing, and it will help us developing a better way to communicate. So yes, even though this type of classes I've been talking too much, I'm hoping for you to, at least right now, have several doubts and start thinking. And once you start thinking, then you start reasoning. And once you start reasoning, you start questioning everything. And that's good. that's a good thing. And at least for the English language, that's the best thing you can do. You should start arguing, but of course you need the knowledge to be able to argue. So with this, I hope you are more inspired to start learning more about the English language and learning more about communication, and of course learning more about general knowledge, because to be able to argue or to have arguments to defend your points of view, you need not just vocabulary, you need knowledge. To be able to do critical thinking, you need the knowledge, but you also need the practice to be able to communicate. So it is a combination of everything, actually. Yes. Any questions right now? Okay, then since we finished, let's remind you that about the homework for this week will be about discussing. I'm adding a second one. You will be having a discussion about the fallacies and also a homework about the Stroman fallacy. You're going to watch a few videos, I think the very short videos that will explain a little more about the Stroman fallacy. And of course, you're going to be asked to find out about other fallacies. So yes, at the beginning of this unit, we're going to talk a little more about what makes you better in critical thinking, and we are starting with fallacies. Okay, and like I said, there is many more. We only cover one here in this class, which was the Stroman fallacy, but there is many more, several more. All right, guys, we are wrapping up the class right now. We're dismissing it. So let's say our goodbyes. Have a nice rest of the week, and we'll see each other through the advising time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.